Conshohocken Borough Council special meeting duly open.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Borough residents. This evening, I will be proposing the 2020 budget. Again, this is a draft and a proposal for Council's consideration over the next 2 weeks, and it will be on the agenda for consideration on November 20th. Just a presentation outline to start. Again, we'll be going through the budget process itself. We'll highlight some 2019 department accomplishments. We'll go over the 2020 proposed budget overview, which will include an explanation of revenue sources, 2020 budget highlights, and 2020 department goals, and then we will go over next steps. A quick review of the budget timeline for this year. The budget process starts around June. In July of 2019, we held a special council capital budget workshop. And then in August and September, we spent our time developing our operational budgets and had meetings to review potential expenditures. And then in September of 2019, we held a special operational budget workshop. October of 2019, we used that month to really do an administrative review of the 2020 proposed budget. And then, of course, tonight we are here to present the proposed budget. And on November 20th, on your agenda will be authorization to advertise the 2020 budget and the tax levy ordinance. And on December 18th, it will be on your agenda to consider adoption of the budget and adoption of the tax levy ordinance. So that is a breakdown of how the budget process works in Conshohocken. It's an extremely efficient process. There are multiple conversations that happen over the course of many months. And there is a lot of due diligence on both council and the administration parts. So a big thank you to everyone involved in that process. So before I move into an overview of the proposed 2020 budget, I think it's important to reflect on the accomplishments from 2019 because they highlight the many services that the community receives as a result of their tax dollars. It also exemplifies that the borough works hard on a regular basis to provide quality service to its constituents. So while these are not all, they are some of my favorites. So we will start with the police department. The police department focused in 2019 on public safety training and community outreach. Community outreach events included some things such as Shop with a Cop, bike giveaways at Conshohocken Elementary School, Thanksgiving meals for 60 underprivileged families, a toy drive, a student backpack giveaway, a national night out participation. You can see on the screen our officers held a CPR class along with our mayor. Suicide awareness panel participation. They raised money for St. Jude's. They hosted a community shred event. On the screen in front of you can see recognition for life-saving activities. And they conducted a senior fraud prevention discussion. In regards to training, they increased training and investigations in specific task forces. They coordinated and conducted a multi-agency active shooter and emergency management drill, and they trained partner EMS and fire department personnel on active shooter response. And finally, in regards to public safety, and I know that these initiatives in particular are very important to our chief, they joined a federal task force conducting child exploitation investigations. They reduced Part 1, which are serious nature crimes, by 5.97%. And they increased clearance of these same crimes by 88.9%. They reduced Part 2, which are less serious crimes, by 11.49%. So a big thank you to our police department for keeping us safe on a regular basis. And again, you can just see participation with our kids at Conshohocken Elementary, participation in Night Out, and then with our seniors at our community center. Moving on to our fire department. Again, they focused on public safety and outreach. They completed classes in high-rise training. They participated and hosted community events and fire prevention events, including sprinkler night, meet and greet at the parks, an annual fire prevention week held at local schools, an annual colonial fire prevention for multiple local fire companies, which we hosted on Fayette Street. And they hired 1 full-time firefighter and 4 part-time firefighters. And again, this is a big hit in our community, sprinkler night at Marywood Park. So again, thank you to our fire department as well for keeping us safe and for really engaging with our community. Moving on to emergency management. Emergency management successfully completed a full-scale exercise focused on an active shooter scenario. You can see on the screen in front of you the magnitude and the importance of seeing all of our emergency management personnel together in one space making an impact in our community. They worked with local, state, and federal agencies for training purposes and preparation of real-life incidents. This was the largest training that was ever conducted in our borough or for a borough of our size. They launched an emergency communication system called Code Red and Ready Monco. They introduced a new digital system that was implemented as a secondary radio system to the Montgomery County Emergency Center. And this system in particular allows the borough to utilize our own radio system without tying up the county radio lines. And lastly, they implemented BlazeMark to its full capacity to create, upload, and store all commercial property structure plans and emergency response methods. Moving on to public services. So public services has multiple facets of operation. The first being public works, and there's multiple divisions within public works. There's buildings, sanitation, recycling, streets, and parks. These guys really are the backbone of the borough. They received an email today from an individual that basically thanked them for their responsiveness and willingness to jump in after hours. So just recognizing their efforts on a regular basis. But for the buildings division in particular, they transitioned to taking full responsibility of our administration building from the developer T.N. Ward, and now our tenant spaces are fully occupied. So that was a big accomplishment in this year. For sanitation and recycling, they successfully rolled out new trash cans and recycling carts to borough residents, and you can see on the screen in front of you that that was in conjunction with our EAC. With completion of this rollout, it decreased injuries to employees, and they completed an assessment of our current borough recycling program. And lastly, they were awarded a DEP 902 grant, and they purchased a new dump truck with leaf collection and storm sewer vacuum, which enables us to expand our recycling program. For our streets division, we continued to develop an infrastructure replacement program. We implemented the use of brine. We finished the 6th Avenue restriping project, and evaluated problematic intersections and what we can use to fix these intersections with liquid fuels. And lastly, our parks division, they completed a second round of ash tree treatment, and they also, in conjunction with the EAC, planted trees at the B Field, and they will be planting trees at Sutcliffe Park. So thank you to our public works. Public services also includes licensing and inspections, and unfortunately I don't have any pictures for licensing and inspections. They, on a regular basis, are out enforcing our code. So they have a very difficult job that they do very well, so we thank them for their efforts. But importantly, they implemented a new property maintenance, which targeted rear yards along alleys with rear house numbers. And they implemented the 2015 International Code and worked to educate property owners and contractors on those changes, which is important. For our Department of Recreation Services, if you have not been in the community center, I urge you to stop in. This council has approved some major renovations to take place with very little money, so the impact is huge. So I urge all of our residents to take advantage of the community center and to stop in and see kind of what those changes entail and look like. But just some highlights from this year. Again, we upgraded the community center with fresh paint and installed new flooring. We implemented in-house fitness programs, increased youth and adult program offerings, increased overall program registration, increased marketing efforts through borough-wide mailing of an activity guide, and we introduced email distribution through Constant Contact. We implemented an in-house summer day camp and hired a summer camp director, and we introduced a summer senior barbecue and a movie in the park night event. So a lot of stuff, a lot of good stuff happening in the Department of Recreation, and a lot of free events and services available to our community. Moving into administrative services, and these are not as flashy or noticeable, but they're just as important. So we utilized grants and training provided by Delaware Valley Trust. We implemented a records retention policy and organized our department files. We adopted a parental leave policy, which was one of the first in Montgomery County. We adopted an ordinance which amended the non-uniform pension plan. We finalized paid firefighter physical protocols. We created a GASB qualified trust for other post-employment benefits, which will only help to further ensure the financial viability of the borough in the future. We completed financial audits, which included the borough's financial audit, fire company audit, liquid fuels, workers' comp, and pensions. We streamlined procedures for payroll processing and purchase orders and implemented a performance evaluation procedure for borough-wide for all non-uniform employees. Some other highlights include receipt of UDAG loan funds, which have been owed to the borough for quite some time. So you got quite a bit of money back in, which, again, we can pump back out to the community. And we had some groundbreaking on some major developments, which, again, just increases your tax revenue, which helps the community as a whole. For zoning and community development, again, Mr. Peters pointed out that I had no pictures, but a lot of this stuff happens behind the scenes. So in community development and zoning, we completed housing rehab on 5 properties belonging to low to moderate income residents. We closed out the CDBG and home grants, issued 17 outdoor cafe licenses. We are in receipt of the 2018 CDBG grant funds in the amount of $125,000. We were awarded a DEP 902 recycling grant in the amount of $212,000. And we just received a home program grant in the amount of $350,000. So a lot of money coming in from grants, which again makes it possible that you're not providing those services through tax dollars. So a big thank you to Ms. Stetler for all of her hard work on that. We transitioned from a consulting rehabilitation specialist to an in-house specialist. We completed 16 zoning, conditional use, and relief extension hearings, and we initiated a full review and revision of the borough zoning ordinance. Not a small task. And last but not least, our communication and special events department. So just a few non-special event initiatives that took place. We're in the process of updating the borough's website, which should be finalized by the end of 2019. We received first place for our newsletter, second place for our website, and third place for social media through PSAB. We produced 2 borough newsletters. We designed, produced, and mailed for the first time a Department of Recreation Services activity guide. And then, of course, coordinated, planned, and organized all facets of borough special events and annual community events. And some of those events include our fireworks, our summer concert series in our parks, Fun Fest on Fayette Street, and of course our Halloween parade. And then for some community events, they included the Mayor's Car Festival and Art Show, the Beer Garden at the A Field, the Soapbox Derby, and the St. Patty's Day Parade. And then of course, our Christmas tree lighting ceremony that's hosted by the Ambucks. Of course, there's Santa. And our menorah lighting, which is hosted at Marywood Park House. So again, these accomplishments are an overview of borough operations from 2019. And I would like to thank all borough staff for their hard work and our elected officials for all of their guidance and direction from the commencement to the completion of each project. I hope that these highlights from 2019 illustrate that your tax dollars are being put to good use. That was a mouthful, so I'm going to take some water. So now we move into the meat of the conversation, which is the actual overview of the 2020 budget. To really understand the budget, you start with revenue sources. Those primary revenue sources being real estate tax, real estate transfer tax, earned income tax, local services tax, mercantile tax, business privilege tax, and fund balance. On the screen in front of you, you can see a breakdown of how those revenue sources are allocated. So 42% is coming from earned income tax. 17% comes from real estate tax. 11% is from fund balance, which is reserve funds. 3% comes from local service tax, 21% is generated from business privilege tax, and 3% is generated from mercantile tax. So you can see on our budget, in terms of revenue, 42% is coming from earned income tax, which is a big number, which is why our businesses and our commercial markets are so important to the viability of the borough. But for a resident, real estate taxes is really the part of the conversation. So 17% comes from real estate taxes. So let's talk about real estate taxes briefly. There are two components to the budget. The budget as it relates to the borough's constituents, and the budget as it relates to approval from our elected officials. So again, I'm going to take a second to provide a brief explanation and explain how we put your tax dollars to work. When we talk about real estate taxes, we're talking about millage. So what is millage? Millage rate is the amount per $1,000 used to calculate taxes on a property. 1 mil represents $1 in taxes per 1,000 in tax assessed value. So I remember the first time I was looking at these calculations thinking, what does that mean? So it helps me if I put it into an actual example. So if a home's assessed value is $108,000, then 1 mil of tax would equal $108. The borough's total millage rate in 2019 was 30.121. This means that the homeowner in this particular example owes $30.121 in taxes for every 1,000 in tax assessed value. So if you do an actual calculation, if you take the millage times 108, it amounts to $3,253.07 in property taxes. So you might ask, where does the 30.121 come from? Well, it comes from 4 different sources. The borough, which their millage in 2019 was 3.5, the community college, whose millage in 2019 was 0.39, and the county, who in 2019 their millage was 3.459, and lastly, the Colonial School District, whose millage was 22.772. So if you add all those numbers up, you get to 30.121. So what does that mean? How do we put it all together for this particular homeowner? So if a homeowner owes $3,253 in total property taxes, what do they owe to the borough, community college, the county, and the school district? Well, on an annual basis, they owe to the borough $378. To the county, they owe $373. To the community college, they owe $42, and to the school district, they owe $2,459. So you can see in the breakdown where your tax dollars are going. And on the pie chart in front of you, 75.6% of your taxes owed annually are going to the school district. 11.48% goes to the county, 1.29% goes to the community college, and 11.62% goes to the borough. So what does this breakdown mean for a borough resident? Basically, if we refer back to my previous example, this would mean that this particular property owner would owe approximately $31.50 a month to the borough. And what services do you get for $31.50 a month? You get trash removal, recycling, snow plowing, upgraded and maintained parks, 24/7 police protection, fire protection, emergency services, library services, code enforcement, permitting, property maintenance, park programming, road improvements, a community center, and access to free special events, to name a few services you get for your money. $31.50 a month for all of those services is not a bad deal. I think it's important to keep in mind that there are neighboring municipalities very close to Conshohocken whose residents pay $30 a month just for trash removal. So you as elected officials should be commended for placing your residents in a position where they're spending, in this particular example, $31.50 a month for all the services that the borough provides. So now that we understand what that means for a resident in terms of real estate taxes, what does that mean for the borough budget? In other words, what's the value of 1 mil mean for the budget? So shifting gears just a little bit. If the total assessed value of property in the borough is $642 million and the millage is 3.5, then the estimated total revenue coming into the borough in real estate taxes is about $2.2 million. You have to factor in penalties, delinquents, and discounts. So once you minus all of those things, the estimated real estate tax to be collected is around $2.1 million. That is then further broken down into specific funds, which you utilize to fund your operations. One of those funds is called General Fund. A specific levy is assigned to that, and it creates about $1.8 million in revenue. Streetlight, $103,000. Debt service, $43,000. Fire, $77,000. Library, $51,000. So that's what your millage means to your budget. That's where your tax dollars are going to work. They fund those specific funds, which equates to about $2.1 million. So what does that mean for the future? So we've talked about the current. While the proposed budget in front of you this evening does not include a millage increase, it would not be fiscally responsible if we did not discuss what a proposed 1 mil increase from 3.5 to 4.5 mils would mean for the borough budget and for a borough resident. In looking towards the future, there are two main areas of operation that need attention: infrastructure and emergency services. The borough's current debt service does not have a funding source. If the borough wants to address these necessary capital improvements in the future, we need to put a funding source in place to cover the borough's current debt. The current debt service for the borough is approximately $690,000. A 1 mil increase allocated specifically for debt service would help improve the borough's future borrowing ability in order to qualify for financing for projects like the infrastructure project and any future capital needs as it relates to emergency services. Therefore, I would like to take a second to illustrate what a 1 mil increase would mean for a borough resident and what this would mean for the borough's budget. If I go back to my previous example, a resident with an assessed home value of $108,000 at 3.5 mils, again, they would owe the borough approximately $378 annually. If the borough were to increase to 4.5 mils, they would now owe taxes to the borough in the amount of $486 annually. In total, the resident would have to pay an additional $108 per year. If you break that down further, that's $9 per month, $2 per week, or 30 cents per day. For the borough's budget, the borough would now have a designated funding source for debt service. The total tax revenues would increase by $642,000. More importantly, this means that dollars that formerly had to be earmarked for debt service out of reserves or general operating funds can now instead be utilized to provide additional services and amenities to the community. And who wouldn't want another renovated park or another free event? Therefore, and you can see on the screen that, again, the monies would be allocated directly to the debt service fund, which would increase your revenues by $642,000, and you get a total of about 2.8. So therefore, the question and tough decision I'm asking council and the borough residents to consider this evening is whether an extra $108 a year is worth being able to start laying the financial foundation for future necessary infrastructure and emergency services capital improvements as it relates to the borough's financial position and borrowing ability by funding the borough's current debt service that exists today. So Borough Council, I would ask that you seriously consider this fiscally responsible proposal for the 2020 budget cycle. For the borough residents that are here or will be watching, I understand that an extra $108 a year is a difficult proposition. However, it's the right thing to do as we look towards the future needs of the borough. If I go back to our previous conversation, that would mean that with this proposed $1 mil increase, this particular property owner would owe approximately $40.50 a month to the borough. And what services would you get for $40.50 a month? You would get trash removal, recycling, snow plowing, upgraded and maintained parks, 24/7 police protection, fire protection, emergency services, library services, code enforcement, permitting, property maintenance, park programming, road improvements, a community center, and access to free special events, to name a few services you get for your money. Additionally, for an extra $9 a month or 2 trips to Starbucks, you would get a borough that was better positioned to look at potential financing options for the future and much needed capital investments. Previously, I mentioned that $31.50 a month was not a bad deal for all of these services. However, $40.50 a month is also not a bad deal when you consider the future potential and impact this increase would have on the borough as a whole. So before we shift gears and review the remainder of the proposed 2020 budget, I will leave you with this thought. The last tax increase to take place in the borough of Conshohocken was in 2007. In 2007, the borough increased the millage rate to a sum of 4 mils, which was then decreased down to 3.5 mils in 2010, where it has remained ever since. In other words, there has been no tax increase in the borough of Conshohocken in over 13 years. The tax rate has stayed the same with no increases or decreases for a decade. That is a very long time, especially considering all of the amenities, services, and upgrades that have occurred in the borough over the past 10 years. I do not need an answer this evening regarding the $1 mil increase. However, I am asking that you take the next 2 weeks to consider this proposal based on the information provided to you this evening. In 2 weeks, on November 20th, 2 proposed budget options will be in front of you for consideration. The proposed budget in front of you, which is balanced and sound, and also a proposed budget in front of you this evening that includes a $1 mil increase allocated specifically to debt service. On November 20th, I will first ask which budget option you would like to move forward with, and then I will ask for authorization to advertise the proposed 2020 budget along with the appropriate tax levy ordinance. So now that we've talked about taxes and we have a better understanding of tax revenue and how those tax revenue dollars are utilized, we'll move into an overview of the 2020 proposed budget. Most importantly, what we are proposing tonight is a balanced budget with revenues and expenditures equaling $13,563,915. That includes fund balance in the revenues and includes transfers to savings funds in expenditures. But again, it's a balanced budget. On the screen in front of you is a breakdown of the operating revenues, with 59% coming again from Tax Enabling Act, with the majority of them coming from EIT, which is Earned Income Tax. and a breakdown of operating expenditures. So you can see that approximately $5 million is generated from police services, around $2 million is expended in general government, $650,000 expended in fire, $826,000 expended in licensing and inspections, about $3 million in public services, $760,000 in culture and recreation, and then, of course, $1 million in interfund transfers to reserve funds. It's important to note that the overall increase from 19 to 20 is 2.98%, with the majority of the increase coming from contractual obligation, pension requirements, professional services, and parking fees, which are new since we now have increased public parking available to our residents. And understand that the increased parking fees, it's an expenditure out, but it's revenue coming in. So it's, in essence, a wash. And finally, we have a breakdown of our major cost centers. 63% of the budget coming from personnel, 30% coming from operating expenditures, and 7% allocated from transfers to reserve funds. So you might ask, what's the justification for all of these proposed costs? I think it's important to look at some budget highlights and a sampling of departmental goals for 2020. Some important budget highlights include a decreased reliance on fund balance, a use of rate stabilization funds to lower our healthcare renewal through divot, a continued investment into reserve funds and our OPEB trust, an investment into public safety for our fire services that includes part-time firefighters, a fire stipend program, a new fire truck and fire vehicles and equipment, police vehicles, emergency service equipment, and the continued appropriation to Narberth Ambulance. In public services, we have an increased investment, a continued investment, and that includes a proposal to renovate Aubrey Collins Park and to continue to upgrade and maintain our fleet, a continued investment into recreation services to ensure that we are improving the overall quality of life, and debt service, depending on your decision, specific allocated funds for debt service through a millage increase, which is fiscally responsible and strategic planning for the future. So in addition to the highlights, we have goals, and the goals are generated with an attempt to stick to the SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So what are our goals for 2020? For the police, they plan to continue their community outreach initiatives, to increase the clearance rate for Part 1 and Part 2 crimes, to promote positive police-civilian contacts, to implement a new federal crime reporting method, to increase effectiveness in communications related to emergency management, and to strategically evaluate options to decrease reliance on overtime compensation as it relates to department operations. In our fire department, our goals are to purchase a new fire truck, to continue to increase fire prevention activities, to continue to advance the fire department with education and training to better serve the community, strategically hire part-time firefighters with EMT and/or paramedic experience, to equip the Gator with a small fire pump and medical supplies that will be utilized at community events, to educate and train new hires and current employees to understand building structures, layout, and construction types as our landscape changes and evolves, and most importantly, to support our volunteer firemen and women through a fire stipend program that has been developed in conjunction with both of our fire companies. In emergency management, the goal is to conduct one full-scale exercise focused on fire services, to train employees on first aid, CPR, and AED, and to create an emergency operations center. For Public Works, in the Buildings Division, we hope to continue to examine this building's future needs and develop a comprehensive maintenance program for our newly occupied tenants. In our sanitation and recycling division, the goal is to improve education and enforcement of trash and recycling regulations, and to continue to apply for new grants to pay for additional assets. In the streets division, we will begin to review comprehensive road repairs and maintenance program. We will work with our engineer to address continuing traffic and safety issues on roadways in the borough, and continue working with our engineer for creation of a comprehensive road program for the future. And in our parks division, the goal is to replace the court lights at Sutcliffe Park and to restructure and repair Aubrey Collins Park. In licensing and inspections, the goal is to enforce the new property maintenance program, which targets rear yards along alleys, and to review and assist with permitting throughout the completion of new development projects in the borough, and to finish these projects with as little disruption as possible. For recreation, it's to continue with improvements to the community center with projects focused on HVAC, furniture, and wall padding, to enhance amenities at Sutcliffe Park, which includes the restructuring of the basketball courts, to continue to improve program offerings for youth, teens, families, and seniors, to plan and organize trips for the community and surrounding areas, and to assess rental fees for facilities and parks, since our facilities and parks are now in such high demand. And for administrative services, we will provide employee training with online classes and seminars in conjunction with Divot, to coordinate with the borough's labor attorney on a revision of the borough's employee manual, to continue organization of departments' files, and to structure our archive room for future storage and document retention needs. In zoning and community development, our goal is to complete the revision of the 2001 zoning ordinance, to assist in the transition of staffing for zoning services, to archive our zoning files, to process and complete 6 to 9 single-family owner-occupied properties through our home and CDBG grants, to complete an update of all properties with special dedicated parking spaces, and to continue monitoring grant opportunities and submit grant applications. And again, last but not least, our communications and special events. Our goal is to create a social media policy, which includes archiving solutions, to develop resources and tools for website management, to assess the functionality of the borough's mobile app, and to archive all department files and emails. So we believe that the budget highlights presented this evening, along with the 2020 departmental goals, provide justification for the dollars we are proposing to spend in 2020. So you might ask, what happens now? So on November 20th, again, on the agenda will be consideration to authorize the budget. If that authorization is given, then the budget will be posted in the lobby of Borough Hall and on the Borough website. Public notices and the tax levy ordinances will be advertised, and then a vote to adopt the budget and the tax levy ordinance will all be on the December 18th regularly scheduled council meeting. So last but not least, I would just like to conclude by stating that we as administrators are honored to serve the Borough of Conshohocken, not just the elected officials, but also the residents, business owners, and community groups. It is our belief that through this proposed budget for 2020 and collaboration between these three entities, that the borough can continue to evolve forward with the ultimate goal of enhancing the quality of life in Conshohocken. And now I know you're tired of listening to me talk, so thank you for your time and also for your consideration of the 2020 proposed budget. It really is an honor to work diligently every day to make Conshohocken the place to live, work, and play. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Great job. Meeting adjourned.